The letter was not addressed to her. That was the first thing Rosanna noticed, and the second thing she noticed was that it had never been sent. She found it pressed between pages 43 and 44 of a Linnaean Atlas of English Wildflowers, a handsomely bound volume left on the study desk that Lucian had set aside for her use, delivered without note or ceremony by the housekeeper on the third morning of their marriage. A wedding gift, she supposed, though he hadn't said so. She had lifted the cover to examine the plates, which were good work, accurately colored, and the folded paper had slipped out and fallen open on the oak surface, the way things fall when they have been waiting. She did not mean to read it, and then she did. It was written to someone named Graymay, a friend from Lucian's years at Oxford, she gathered, from the easy shorthand of men who have stopped explaining themselves to each other. The handwriting was steady and unworried. The date was 3 weeks before the wedding. The arrangement is settled. Rosanna Thorne is competent and quiet, precisely what Ashgrove requires. She appears to have her own occupations, which suits the situation well. I don't anticipate any particular difficulty. She read it a second time, not from shock, from the need to be entirely certain of what she was reading. Competent and quiet, precisely what Ashgrove requires. She set the letter on the desk. She looked at the botanical plates. On the left-hand page, a marsh violet, rendered by someone who had taken the time to see it clearly, the slight asymmetry of the petals, the way the veining darkened toward the center. Rosanna had spent 4 years doing that kind of looking. She had a commission from Hadley & Sons Natural History Publishers in London, 2 volumes of British wildflower illustrations, and she had been halfway through the plates for the second volume, when Lucian Mercer had called on her mother and the arrangement. She understood now that this had always been the correct word for it. Had been settled over an afternoon's tea. She had told herself she could do both. Keep the commission, manage what was expected of her, work in the margins of a life that had been designed without her input. She had believed it because she needed to believe it. She folded the letter. She placed it back inside the atlas, between pages 43 and 44, where it had been. She smoothed the cover and set the atlas on the center of the desk, where he would see it. She did not leave a note. There was nothing she wanted to say that a note could carry with any dignity. She went to the wardrobe and packed her illustration case first. The flat-sided case, with the brass latches that held her pencils, her watercolor blocks, and the 7 half-finished plates she had been working on since before the ceremony. She packed her naturalist's notebook, her father's copy of Gilbert White, 2 changes of clothes, the commission letters from Mr. Hadley, which she had kept in the case throughout the marriage, on an instinct she had not examined until now. She did not pack the household keys. She left those on the ring by the kitchen door. She walked to the village in the early morning while the mist was still on the fields. 2 miles, with the illustration case over one shoulder and the notebook under her arm. The hedgerows were thick with elderflower. She had sketched those hedgerows in March, in what felt now like somebody else's life. She caught the morning coach to Winchester, and in Winchester she boarded the London train. She sat with the illustration case between her feet and watched Hampshire fall away outside the window. She let herself feel, for the length of one tunnel, exactly how much it hurt. Not because she had loved Lucian in the way that rearranges a person, but because she had tried. She had brought everything she was into that house, and had been quietly assessed as adequate. Unobtrusive. Precisely what the estate required, like a well-fitted lock or a reliable clock. She folded the feeling away. She opened her naturalist's notebook, and looked at the half-finished orchid on the last page, and thought about what the next line needed to be. Mr. Hadley was a small man with ink-stained fingers, and the particular energy of someone who had been waiting for a conversation for a long time. He received her in his Bloomsbury office without surprise. She had written ahead, and looked at the illustration case with an expression of quiet relief. "You're back," he said. "I'm back," Rosanna said. "I would like to finish the commission." He studied her for a moment, the way he studied botanical specimens, cataloging without comment. "The light in the studio upstairs is better in the mornings. Mrs. Baines will show you the space." The studio was a long, north-facing room with 3 tall windows and a drafting table that had served every illustrator Hadley & Sons had employed for 30 years. The surface was scarred with decades of careful work. Rosanna set her case down and looked at the light coming through the glass. It was exactly right. She found lodgings 2 streets away with a widow named Mrs. Gorth, who asked no questions about a woman traveling alone with an illustration case and a single bag, and who had the steady practicality of someone who has long since stopped waiting for permission to occupy space in the world. Rosanna worked every morning. The plates she completed in the first 2 weeks were, Mr. Hadley said, the best she had done. She wasn't certain he was wrong. There was something different in the lines now, a stillness. The particular quality of a hand that has decided it has nothing left to prove to anyone except the subject directly in front of it. She thought about Lucian less than she expected. What she thought about was the word unobtrusive. She turned it over on her evening walks along the Bloomsbury streets, past the shop fronts and the plane trees, and the other women moving through the city with their own purposes, their own quiet urgencies. She had spent 27 years being told, in various gentle registers, that her interest in field sketching and Linnaean classification was unusual, charming enough for a girl with an eccentric father, less appropriate for a woman who ought to be thinking about households and calling cards and the correct management of a social calendar. She had never been precisely charming in the way that was asked of her. She had been better at looking at things. She supposed that was part of why Venetia Mercer had agreed to the match. A daughter-in-law who kept herself occupied and didn't require performance. Precisely what the estate required. Lucian found the atlas on a Wednesday afternoon, 5 days after she left. He had gone to the study for papers. He noticed the atlas because it was not where he had left it. He had placed it on the edge of the shelf, and now it was in the center of the desk. He noticed the desk was otherwise bare. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before he crossed the room and opened it. The letter was on page 43. His own handwriting looked unfamiliar to him, the way one's voice sounds wrong in a recording. He read it the way Rosanna had read it. Not from confusion, but from the need to be entirely certain. Competent and quiet, precisely what Ashgrove requires. He stood at the desk for a long time. His mother, Venetia, found him there. She was a composed woman who had managed the Mercer estate's social architecture for 30 years, and was not accustomed to events she had not anticipated or arranged. She looked at the atlas, at the letter, and did not ask him to explain. She left, he said. Yes, Venetia said. Briggs told me this morning. She found this. He held up the letter. His mother was quiet. I wrote it, he said, not as an accusation, but because stating a thing plainly is sometimes how you begin to understand it. I wrote to Graham 3 weeks before the wedding. I described her as. I know what you wrote, Venetia said. He looked at her. She had a commission. An actual commission, from a publishing house in London. 2 volumes of natural history illustrations, and she was halfway through the second. Venetia said nothing. I never asked, he said, not once. In 3 months of engagement and 8 days of marriage, I never asked what she was working on. He set the letter down. I don't even know what the second volume covers. He went to London 3 days later. Not for Rosanna. He told himself that honestly, because honesty was what this particular situation seemed to require. He went because there was business, because there was always business, and because somewhere in the city, Rosanna Thorne was finishing a commission he had never thought to ask about, and he did not know what to do with that fact except to be in the same city as it. He wrote to her. A short letter, formal at first, in the style of a man who has decided to do the right thing and is not yet certain what the right thing is. He said he had found the atlas. He said he understood why she had left it for him. He did not ask her to return. She wrote back, 8 lines. She was well. The commission was progressing. She did not wish him ill. He wrote again. The letters found their rhythm over the following weeks. He told her things he had not previously considered worth saying aloud. She wrote about the Bloomsbury streets, the light in the studio, a particularly stubborn plate of a water crowfoot she had redrawn 4 times before she was satisfied with it. He read those letters with the specific attention of a man who has understood, late, that he has been doing his looking wrong. It was Ned who made things plain. Ned was 13 and had the infuriating habit of stating exact true things at exactly the wrong moments, which Lucian had found maddening for years and had, if he were honest, long secretly admired. Ned had liked Rosanna. He had followed her around the Ashgrove gardens, asking questions about plants that she had answered with genuine attention. The kind of attention adults rarely bring to a 13-year-old's questions. When Lucian returned to Ashgrove in late August, Ned found him in the study where the atlas still sat on the desk, because Lucian had not moved it, and said, without preamble, "Did you write to her?" "I have been writing to her." "Does she write back?" "Yes." "What does she say?" "That's between us." Ned sat down in the good chair without being invited. Is she coming back? I don't know. Do you want her to? Lucian looked at him. He had never lied to Ned. I don't know that either. I'm working on understanding what I want. It's more complicated than I was raised to think it would be. Ned considered this with the gravity of someone who takes complicated things seriously. She looked at me, he said finally, like what I said actually mattered. Most adults don't do that. He stood up. That's not nothing. He left. Lucian sat at the desk and looked at the atlas for a long time. Then he pulled out paper and wrote the longest letter he had yet written to Rosanna. He did not know if it was good. He sent it anyway. Ned got sick in October. It started with an afternoon ride, through cold rain he had underdressed for and not mentioned at dinner. By the fourth day the fever had settled in with the patient persistence of something that intends to stay. By the seventh, Dr. Pemworth was quietly watching the way the boy's breathing had deepened. Not alarmed, but watching. There is a naturalist in London, Pemworth told Lucian in the hallway, voice low. A botanical illustrator with Hadley and Sons. Her father was a country physician for 20 years before he turned to field study. She trained beside him, and I've seen his remedies cited in several herbalist texts. Her knowledge of plant-based treatments for pulmonary fever is. I know who she is, Lucian said. Pemworth looked at his face and said nothing further. Lucian went back into Ned's room. Ned was awake, barely. His face was flushed, and his eyes had the heavy look of someone losing a slow argument with his own body. Not good. His voice was rough. We don't know yet. Maybe not good? Lucian had never lied to Ned. Maybe, but we're going to do everything that can be done. Ned closed his eyes. After a moment, you should go get Rosanna. She knows plants. She knows remedies. A pause. She'd know what to do. She always looked like she knew what to do. He slept after that. Lucian sat beside him in the dark and listened to the sound of his breathing and thought about all the things he had only recently begun to understand, about the cost of not paying attention. He left for London the following morning. Rosanna opened the building's front door herself. She had been working late, alone in the studio, with a black-eyed Susan that refused to cooperate. And she was still holding a pencil when she heard the knock and came down the stairs. She stopped when she saw him. He looked like a man who had been traveling hard and sleeping poorly and was managing both by moving forward. Because stopping would require him to feel what he was feeling. Ned is ill, he said. Fever 7 days, his breathing he stopped. Reorganized. I need your help. Something shifted in her face. Not softening, but a reorganization of priorities. The specific change that happens when a child's name is attached to the word sick. Come in, she said. Tell me everything. She listened without interrupting. She had paper from the studio, and she wrote while he talked. The timeline, the fever's pattern, the breathing, what Pemworth had prescribed, how Ned had responded. When he finished, she looked at her notes. Cyclical fever, she said. Worse at night, better by noon? Yes. Is the cough producing anything? He thought. Some. Keeping water down? Better. Than food. She set the pencil down and looked at him directly for the first time, since he had come through the door. I need to see him. I know what this presentation looks like, and I know what my father used for it. The compounds aren't difficult, but they need to be correctly prepared, and I'd rather bring them than try to source the ingredients in Hampshire. She was already moving toward the stairs. Can you arrange a coach for 6 o'clock tomorrow? Yes. 6 o'clock is fine. She paused on the third step. I'm going because of Ned, you understand that. I understand. He wrote to me, 3 letters this summer. He told me about the foxes in the south field, and a cloud formation he'd been trying to identify for a week. She looked at him steadily. A 13-year-old kept in contact with me when the adults in his life had decided the situation was resolved. The least I can do is return the courtesy. She went back upstairs. He sat in the chair by the door and listened to the sounds of organized preparation and did not fill the silence, which was itself a thing he had recently learned to do. Ned turned on the 5th day of treatment. Rosanna had prepared the compounds from dried elderberry and boneset and a careful measure of willow bark. Things her father had used for fever with a pulmonary component, things she had watched him compound 100 times before he had turned fully to botany, and which she had never stopped knowing how to do. She sat with Ned each morning and talked to him about plants and foxes and cloud formations while the compounds did their work. He complained that the remedy tasted like the inside of a boot. She told him that was how he could be certain it was working. The morning the fever broke cleanly, Ned opened his eyes and looked at her with the expression of someone who has been proved right about something important. "You came," he said. "I came. Because Lucian went and got you." "He did." Ned settled back against the pillows with the satisfaction of an engineer whose construction has held. "I told him to," he said, "in case you were wondering." "I was wondering," Rosanna said. He smiled and closed his eyes, and the room was warm, and outside somewhere on the grounds a wood thrush was going about its business in the October quiet. Venetia came to her room on the 6th evening. She knocked. She did not announce herself. She came in with the particular composure of a woman who has decided to do something difficult and has decided that the difficulty is not an excuse to avoid it. "You are better than I assessed you to be," Venetia said, not warmly, but accurately. Rosanna looked at her. "I don't need you to have assessed me accurately." "No, but I would like you to know that I understand the error." A pause. "I treated your life as a variable in something I was managing, not as the thing that belonged to a person." Rosanna looked at her for a long moment. "You don't need to ask me for anything, Mrs. Mercer." Venetia looked back at her. "Venetia," she said, "if you prefer." Rosanna did not answer immediately. She wasn't someone who moved to warmth quickly, and Venetia, it appeared, was not either, which was perhaps part of why the conversation was working at all. "Venetia," she said. The older woman nodded once, set down the tea she had brought, and left. Rosanna looked at the door for a moment. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to work. The publisher's reception at the Strand Gallery was held on the first Thursday of November. Hadley and Sons hosted it annually. Natural historians and collectors, and the donors who funded expeditions, gathered in candlelight and quiet competition. The real business of the evening conducted in asides and carefully managed proximity. Rosanna attended because she always attended. 2 of her plates from the 2nd volume were framed on the gallery wall. The black-eyed Susan that had finally yielded, and a panel of late-season heather in 3 stages of bloom. She did not know Lucian was coming until she saw him. He arrived with Venetia. He found Rosanna within the first 20 minutes, and did not pretend he wasn't looking. "I have something I need to say tonight," he told her, publicly. "I want you to know it is happening before it does." She waited. "My mother was in communication with the Foxbourne family this spring, a Miss Adela Foxbourne. Nothing formal, but implied clearly enough that it has become known in certain circles. I intend to correct that tonight." He met her eyes directly. "Not to win something from you, because it is not true, and I am finished leaving untrue things standing, because correcting them is inconvenient." She looked at him. "Lucian." "I'm not asking you for anything tonight," he said. "I'm telling you what is happening, because you deserved accurate information the first time and did not receive it, and I will not make that mistake again." He moved back into the room. She stood beside her framed plates and watched him go. When Hadley called the room to attention for his remarks, Lucian waited for the natural pause and stood. He spoke without notes. His voice was even and carried without effort. He said he had come to make a correction. That his family had been in certain discussions with the Foxbourne family that carried implications which were not accurate, and that these should be addressed directly, rather than managed into rumor. He said that the only woman he intended to be in any significant arrangement with was one who was, as it happened, present that evening, and that whether she agreed was entirely her own matter, and one he had not yet earned the right to ask about. He sat down. The room took a breath and then resumed, but at a different frequency. Rosanna stood beside the heather panel and felt something loosen in her chest. Not resolution, not yet, but the specific quality of a door that has been opened by someone who checked the hinges first. She found him afterward in the corridor off the main room, where the gallery lighting stopped and the air was cooler. "You didn't look at me," she said, "when you spoke." "It wasn't for you to watch," he said. "It was for me to do." She considered that. "What you said, about a significant arrangement. What do you mean by it?" He stopped and started, which was a thing she had noticed him doing more often lately. The stopping and starting of a man who has discovered that honesty takes more patience than efficiency. "I mean that I would like to be in your life in a way that is worth being in it. Not as a variable, not as an arrangement." He looked at her. "I don't have the right word." "Partner," she said. "Yes. That's a precise word with a specific meaning. I know what it means." She looked at him for a long time. The gallery noise moved through the wall in waves. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." "The commission stays mine. When Mr. Hadley offers me a third volume, I accept. My name goes on the title page. Not a footnote, the title page." She held his gaze. "My work is not a hobby that ends when something more important requires my attention. It is what I do. It is what I am." "Yes. London is where I live. You have the estate. We work out the travel as it comes." "Yes. Ned visits whenever he wants. He has a cloud formation he still needs identified." Something moved across Lucian's face that was almost a smile. "He'll require a written explanation." "He'll get one." She looked down at her hands and then back up at him. "There is one more thing." "Name it." "If something is wrong, it gets said, directly, not managed around, not left folded in a book for the other person to find." She met his eyes. "I will not live again in a house where the truth is handled around me like something fragile." "No," he said. "You won't. That is a promise I know how to keep." He held her gaze without looking away. "I am not the man who wrote that letter to Graham. I cannot prove that to you tonight. But I know the distance between what I was and what I am working toward, and it is real." She looked at him for a long time. The corridor was quiet. Through the far window, London was doing what London always did. Moving, lit, entirely indifferent to the specific weight of the conversations happening inside its buildings. "All right," she said. He went very still. "Not an answer to everything," she said. "Not yet, but an answer to whether there is something worth finding out." She looked at him steadily. "I watch things carefully, Lucian. I have been watching you for 6 months. The evidence is better than it was." "I know," he said. "I'm counting on that." She turned and walked back toward the candlelight, and the botanists and the framed plates on the wall. At the door she paused without looking back. "Ned's cloud formation," she said. "It's a cumulonimbus incus. Tell him I'll write him a proper explanation by Friday." Then she went in, and the door swung softly closed behind her. The following spring, Rosanna completed the third volume for Hadley & Sons. Her name was on the title page. The dedication read only, "For N.M., who wanted to know about clouds." The studio in Bloomsbury remained hers. Lucian kept an office 2 streets over. On Tuesday and Thursday mornings he brought coffee to the studio without being asked, set it on the corner of the drafting table without interrupting whatever she was working on, and returned to his own desk. She stopped noting it as a gesture, and began taking it as a given, which was its own kind of answer to the question she had not yet put into words but had been asking since the corridor outside the gallery. Ned spent a full month in London that summer, and catalogued 17 bird species in the square outside Mrs. Gorth's building. He required Rosanna's identification assistance on 4 of them. He gave the rest to her as gifts, presented in his careful handwriting, on a folded sheet of paper that she kept in the back of the naturalist's notebook, because it belonged there. Venetia visited in October and stood for a long time in front of the heather panel that Hadley had hung permanently in the front office. She said nothing for a while. Then she said, "The 3 stages. How long did it take you?" 2 weeks for the preliminary sketches. 3 days for the final plate." Venetia looked at it a moment longer. "It is very good," she said, in the tone of a woman who does not offer compliments she does not mean. She turned. "Shall we have tea?" It was not a question. Rosanna recognized that. She also recognized that Venetia was trying, in the specific language available to her, which was formality and presence and the willingness to stand in a room and look at the thing she had not been able to see before and say clearly that she saw it now. "Yes," Rosanna said, "tea." On a Thursday morning in November, 2 years after she had found a letter pressed between pages 43 and 44, and understood something she could not ununderstand. Rosanna was at the drafting table by 7 o'clock with the coffee going warm at the corner of the surface. A new commission open in front of her. Mosses. This time, a subject she had been wanting to take up for years. And the particular quality of north light coming through the studio windows that was better than any other light in the city for seeing small true things with any accuracy. The door to the studio was open. Below on the street, London was already moving. Somewhere in the office 2 streets over, Lucian was opening his own morning correspondence, and in Hampshire Ned was probably looking at a bird. Rosanna picked up the pencil and looked at the moss. She began.